Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Ernie Epp, Professor Emeritus from Lakehead University, and we're talking about a science of public finance. So Ernie, we've talked a little bit before the show and from my own research and stuff, and what we just heard you say in the last portion of the show is corporate taxes have fallen almost in half. Yes. Over the last 50, 60 years.
Yes.
What impact has that had on the other side of the equation, federal expenses? Let's say for healthcare, this is something that we're all so proud of, is our
yes.
public healthcare. So how has that impacted spending on the federal level for healthcare?
I think that an ultimate impact would be the failure of the federal government, or the unwillingness, the very strong unwillingness of the federal government to add to our healthcare arrangements to public federal funding of them. And pharmacare, I think, would be the easiest one to look at, leaving that to other plans or to individuals finding the money or actually not taking their drugs. That might be the most obvious consequence. But the result can also be, of course, budget deficits. And when there isn't enough money flowing in and there are expenditures that government is committed to, then there will be deficits. And there have been a lot of deficits over the years, and the national debt has grown. And when we have a period or a year in which, for example, over a quarter of the federal budget is going to pay interest on the debt, when you reach those kinds of levels, and this happened later in the Mulrooney years, about the time I was going back to private life at the university in 1989, you had a frightening situation. And so I've thought a good deal about deficits and about the debt and so on. And I found myself beginning to ask one of the ultimate questions about that. Even if you handle it carefully, you're likely to have a debt from the past, simply, certainly. And how should one regard that? It's obviously a burden on the taxpayer in terms of service. If the economy grows, it becomes a less significant part of the economy, and that's what happened. The national debt in 1945 was 133% of gross domestic product. By the mid-50s, it was down to 35% because the economy had expanded so much the debt hadn't been added to.
So we had a huge big debt when we were fighting a war.
Out of the war.
And then we started paying off that debt in the next 10 years.
It wasn't actually paid off very much, but the economy grew. Okay. And because the economy was so much larger, then in relation to that larger economy, the national debt reduced just a little bit, was a much smaller proportion. But I've begun to realize if you're spending $25 or $30 billion a year on interest, who's it going to? What is happening here? Ignoring the possibility that some of the money is actually borrowed money exacerbating your problem. If it were to be revenue money, then money from individuals, corporations, from various kinds of taxes is being transferred to whom? Now, I guess it's being transferred in the first order to life insurance companies, so it's part of the asset. What the country's debt is, or liability, is one of my assets when I own a life insurance policy. So it would become interesting to ask how many Canadians have life insurance. This is one of the ways in which wealth is transferred from, let's take the goods and services tax, which everyone is paying. If we thought that that was the money that's going to pay interest on the debt, then that money is being transferred from the poor, or from everyone, to those who have the means to buy life insurance.
So in the last couple of weeks, I've had the mayor and one of our city councilors on, and they both talked about how over the years, the more and more of the services are being downloaded onto the municipality, and that the federal government is transferring less money to the provinces, and so the provinces have less money, and so they can't afford to provide some of the services, so they're putting it on to the municipality who doesn't have the ability to tax corporations, and so they're feeling the pinch here on the local level. So how does that fit into what you're finding in your research?
Well, it's most easy to explore in picking up another book. The book is Straight Through the Heart, Maud Barlow and Bruce Campbell's book on the 90s, the Chrétien Martin government, or Chrétien's government, Martin as Minister of Finance. It's in that mid-90s when the deficits were enormous, and instead of finding additional revenue to reduce the deficit, Paul Martin and his colleagues decided to cut services, to cut transfers to provinces and so on. And grievous things happened around 1995. In fact, because I was busy teaching, I'd forgotten about the mid-90s. And when I picked that book up and read it, the full horror of it set in. And that's what Mayor Hobbs and others are wrestling with. The Harris government, receiving less, decided to transfer as much spending as they possibly could to municipalities, which means they basically loaded it on property owners. And so what I'm dealing with is the stuff of various kinds of tax protests. I don't want to say tax revolts, but there is a great deal of meat in here, a basis for reconsidering our federal arrangements, the three levels of government, and the revenue and the spending of each of these governments. Of course, among the other consequences of that is the suffering of the First Nations, the fact that we have dozens, hundreds, how many is it, of the reserves with boil water advisories?
Yeah, they don't have safe drinking water.
So in terms funding
of
of education.
The big picture, what I'm getting, we only have a minute or so left, is that over a number of years, we've seen cuts particularly to how much corporations pay of their profit.
Reductions.
This is of that money they make on top of everything they do.
Yes.
We've reduced that by about 50%. That's resulted in big deficits, where we're paying a quarter of our budget
at some points
to just interest on that debt.
Yes.
It's cut back health care and other services.
Yes.
What's happened to all that money that the corporations used to pay in tax? Where did that money go?
Well, Finance Minister Flaherty was very concerned about the fact that they didn't know what to do with it. They were sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars.
The corporations were.
The corporations were, without having a use for it. Now, these were reserves they might be holding to invest at some point. One of the real fears, however, is that they could become targets for takeover because there's all that cash in there. And so it is a danger for a corporation, I think, to have all that money. It'd be much better if they transferred it through taxation to the federal government to spend, enhance economic activity, see more demand for their products and their services, and have reason to invest that money and get it flowing through the economy as well by their private enterprises against the public finance of the country. That's one of the part of the vision that I'm involved in developing in this book on Canadian fiscal history that is well along by now with dozens of tables and hundreds of words, thousands of words. It's on the way to 250 pages.
Oh my gosh. So there's so much more to this. We're out of time, but people that want more information can go to the website.
Yes.
That's taxwealth.ca.
That's right.
Ernie, thank you so much for coming on the show. I sure appreciate it. I wish we had hours here because I think this is fundamental, really, to our democracy here. We'll be back next week with another special guest, and you can check us out on Facebook. It's Community Conversations. Please stay safe and see you next week.
Thanks, Steve.